The lonely season is the most dangerous season because it's where most people quit and give up. How do you survive the season where it feels like you're walking through life with no map, no crowd, no applause? Nobody talks about this part. Nobody warns you that the minute you start choosing yourself, everything around you starts to shift. People pull back, relationships get kind of weird, invitations kind of slow down. And for a second, it kind of makes you think like, am I doing something wrong? Like, what did I do wrong in this scenario? But the thing is, you didn't. You just started to enter the stage in your journey where you just feel lonely because you're growing, and growth costs you comfort first. Welcome back to the Upgrade with Elle. I'm really glad that you're here today because we're having a conversation that I wish somebody had had with me when I first started on my healing journey and kind of upgrading and changing my behaviors. And when I started choosing myself and stopped like all the people-pleasing behaviors, when I first decided to bet on myself, no one prepared me for the loneliness that would come along with that. But what I've learned is loneliness that shows up in that season of your life when you start choosing yourself really isn't a reason to go backwards. It's proof that you're moving forward, and that's a great thing. And today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this topic because it's not just about losing people. It's about losing parts of yourself that once needed them. It's about the emotional detox. It's about the identity death and the rebirth. So let's get into it. But before we dive a little bit deeper, I want to take a second to just mention something quick. When I posted a clip a few months back about resetting, you may have remembered it, maybe you don't, but if you saw it, you'd know because the clip reached so many people. It was replayed, it was shared, I was messaged about it. And what it showed me is that there's so many people that are in this season of their life where they're trying to reset. So many of us are choosing ourselves. So many of us are trying to step into new versions of ourselves, and we're trying to upgrade. And it's hard, not because we're doing it, but because nobody tells us how quiet that reset season can feel, how lonely it can become when you're trying to rebuild from scratch without the old habits, without the old patterns, without the old people. And resetting sounds really beautiful, but living it, it feels like you're standing in an empty room and you're waiting for your furniture to arrive. I mean, it's kind of cold and it can feel really difficult. So if you're resetting right now, if you're in kind of that awkward, lonely space between who you were and who you're becoming, you're not crazy. You're courageous. Just know that. And today's conversation is for you. If that's where you're at, then let's chat. Because loneliness isn't a sign that you're failing your reset. It's actually proof that you're doing it right. And when you decide to truly choose yourself, to really embrace this journey, you expect to feel proud and excited. And for a while you do, but then something unexpected happens and you start to feel grief and you start to feel loss. And it's not because you're failing. It's actually because you're shedding. You are choosing yourself. And what happens is it kind of triggers this emotional withdrawal. It's like symptoms of a withdrawal that you never realized that you had this addiction, but you crave comfort. You craved validation. You craved noise around you to prove that you're doing something right. And what you're actually craving is old survival strategies that you built to protect yourself. So when you stop people pleasing, the silence feels painful, not because you're wrong, but because your nervous system was actually addicted to applause. I had that experience. When you start to set boundaries, that distance starts to feel cold, not because you're doing it wrong, but because your old self was wired to tolerate anything just to stay connected. And when you finally say, you know what, forget it, I'm choosing me, you don't just lose the wrong people, you also start to lose versions of you that once needed those people to survive. You needed those types of connections to feel valid. And that's the part nobody tells you about. They tell you that growth is beautiful. They don't tell you that grief is also a part of growth. And it's not just the people that you lose. You lose the parts of yourself that you weren't expecting to. You lose entire versions of your story. You lose the fantasy of what you thought your life was supposed to look like. So let's really dig into this. When we talk about choosing ourselves, most people think we're just talking about losing people, losing friends, losing relationships. And yes, like sometimes that happens and that's okay. But the deeper loss, the harder loss, that's actually internal. The parts of you that you have to let go of, the versions of you that are no longer serving you and fitting in your life, that's the hard part. And today I want to break it down because when you can name what you're grieving, you can actually stop blaming yourself for feeling broken. And the first thing you lose when you choose yourself is the version that you were that accepted less. The version of you that tolerated being overlooked, the version of you that kept shrinking just to stay liked, to stay approved, to stay in the room, the version of you that thought that survival was enough, but it's not. And when you start betting on yourself, that old identity, it just can't come with you. And you can't build a life that's abundant when self-image is what you're prioritizing, because that's scarcity. And yes, you might start to miss old versions of yourself, but remember, that's because that was the version of yourself that you were familiar with. And you're not just leaving behind what hurt you, you're leaving behind the version of you who learned how to survive in that hurt. The second thing you lose are the relationships that were built around your unhealed self. The friendships that bonded over complaining, the circles that felt safer because that's what kept you together. Your complaints, your gripes in the world, right? Your trauma. And when you start healing, you stop performing, you stop pretending that you're okay in those environments. And you start asking, not out of arrogance, but just out of pure alignment, like, are these relationships really serving me? And that makes some people very uncomfortable, as it should. It quite honestly will make you uncomfortable. And healing doesn't really destroy real relationships. Healing exposes the ones that only existed because you kept abandoning yourself. I want you to really internalize that. And it can be heartbreaking, but it's also clarifying. The third thing you lose is the fantasy, the timeline that you thought you'd be living by. In your head, it's like, I'll be this by 25, I'll do this by 30. And you see that trend happening on Instagram where people are talking about plan A and most people are in plan B. Some people are in plan C, D, or E, right? Because the future you're actually building, it's better, but it's also slower and it's more authentic and it's also messier and it's real and less predictable. And that's okay. Sometimes the dream you have to mourn is the one you built from fear, not faith. It's okay to feel sadness for the life you thought you'd have. I've been there. It doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're awakening. So if you're feeling lost right now, if you're feeling disconnected, if you're questioning everything, it's not because you're off track. It's because you're finally stepping into a new one. And here's the thing, most people don't make it through this season. And we're going to talk about why, because the lonely season is the most dangerous season. Because it's where most people quit and give up and just revert back. And it's not because they aren't capable, but it's not because they aren't worthy, because they are and you are. Because loneliness plays tricks on your mind. And when you're used to constantly getting applause and feeling validated, when you're used to feeling like you're needed and you're surrounded by all of this noise, silence feels like failure. You start second guessing yourself. You start wondering if you're doing too much. You start craving comfort of what you left behind, even if it wasn't good for you. Because the unknown, it can feel terrifying when you're standing alone. And that's why so many people go back. That's why so many people just stop this process. Not because their old life was better, but because it felt familiar. And familiarity isn't the same thing as safety, but we often confuse them. Comfort isn't the same thing as alignment, but we confuse that too. Sometimes the loneliness of growth is the final test. Will you trust the version of yourself that you're building, or will you run back to the version that was merely surviving? The ones who survive in this season, the ones who hold their ground when everything in them wants to go back, those are the ones that actually live the life that they were meant for. And so how do you survive it? How do you survive the season where it feels like you're walking through life with no map, no crowd, no applause? You survive it by understanding that loneliness isn't punishment, it's preparation. You survive it by reframing it in your mind that silence doesn't mean broken or lost. Silence doesn't mean you're abandoned. Silence means you're finally clear enough to hear your own voice. The absence of noise, the absence of distractions, the absence of forced connections, it's giving you a chance to build the life that's real, not reactive. The quiet isn't empty. It's full of things you used to use to drown out. The quiet isn't empty. Use this season. Use it to rebuild trust within yourself. Use it to learn peace when it feels like no one's clapping. Use it to build the foundation that isn't dependent on other people's approval. Because what you build in the lonely seasons becomes the anchor that holds you through the abundant ones. Just remember that. This season won't last forever. I promise you it won't. But who you become in it will. And that's what I want to leave you with today, because if you're in this season of loneliness right now, it's not a detour. It's your invitation. It's the evidence that you're no longer settling for what kept you so small. You're upgrading even if it feels heavy, and you're not alone even when it feels like it. If you're walking through a lonely season right now, I need you to hear me. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are not lost. You are shedding. You are growing. You are becoming. Loneliness isn't proof that you're on the wrong path. It's proof that you're not repeating the old one. You're not losing everything. You're clearing space for the things that are actually meant for you, that are actually meant to be in your life, for friendships that don't require you to shrink, for the opportunities that don't require you to compromise, for the life that doesn't require you to betray yourself just to belong. I know it's hard and I know it's heavy, but you are so much closer than you think you are. And when the new life starts to unfold, baby, when aligned people show up in your life, when the future you were praying for starts catching up to you, you'll realize that nothing you lost was ever really lost. It was a return to you. And that's what you needed all along. That's what you needed, to return to you all along. So I want to leave you with two things. The biggest risk is not failing. It's staying the same. And you cannot change the past, but you can absolutely decide the future. So upgrade accordingly.